Hey adventurers, so today I am doing a book review for Salamandastron by Brian Jacques. This is one of the stories in the Redwall series, and I am very disappointed with myself that I haven't read a Redwall book since in basically a year now. We did a review for Martin the Warrior right when we first started the channel, and we haven't done anything with it since, and that's disappointing to me because I really love this series, and this is one of the series that I want to make our channel a focal point of. So that's what I'm going to do today, is a book review for Salamandastron. This is a young adult fantasy. Specifically, this is a anthropomorphic fantasy, meaning it follows animals with human characteristics. So as always, I will be following the 5 elements of story outline that we use for almost all our videos, and let's get going. So first part, characters. The way Brian Jacques writes characters is super interesting because there's not really like 1 or 2 main characters, there's like 10, and they're all amazing. They're all super interesting. You can follow them, you know exactly who they are. Their personalities are all very distinct from each other. But then at that same time, there's some characters who are main characters, but they're not introduced till you're a good part of the way through the book, sometimes half, sometimes 3/4 of the way through the book before you're introduced to this new character. And it's kind of interesting the way that he does it, and that he can get away with that because he can. The way he writes them, you can introduce a character late into the story, but because they build up to it, and basically it makes sense when they introduce them why that character is there and what they're needed for. So it's never bothered me that he introduces some characters late in the story while having others introduced right at the beginning. The characters that this story follows, as I mentioned, there's a lot of them, are Samkim, Arula, Mara, Pickle Folger, Farago the Assassin, Klitch, Earthstripe the Strong, Thrug, and Dumble. This cast includes a wide range of different animal species, including mice, badgers, weasels, a mole, and a hare. So they're all very different just in that. But there's a ton of other characters besides just those that are in this book and in this series as a whole. Plot. So I kind of wrote out my own synopsis of this book, or at least of some of this book, because this is a spoiler-free review, so we'll see if I like it. I'm just going to read it. Hopefully that's okay. After leaving Salamandastron in search of fulfillment, Mara and Pickle end up stranded from the rest of the mountain's inhabitants and forced to work with the Gaussum shrews in order to get back in time to help defend against the vermin horde led by Farago the Assassin and his son Klitch. Meanwhile, at Redwall Abbey, the mouse Samkin and the mole Arula are forced to go off into the woodlands in search of the thieves who stole the wondrous sword of Martin the Warrior. You can see by that synopsis that this plot follows multiple points of view, but it's very, very easy to distinguish and to separate who you're following at the time. I mean, not only does he use character dialogue tags all the time, but the storylines and the characters that you're following are all so different from each other that it's not difficult to understand who it is that you're following at the moment. It's very interesting to me to see how, when he writes these stories, the plot develops in a way that feels natural and just kind of flows. It's not like there's things about this that feel clunky or out of place. They all just kind of move together and go to where you're supposed to be. And it's really interesting because, I mean, you'll have characters who end up meeting up, but then you'll have another side quest that goes over here, but it's still important to the story because without it, I don't know, it's very interesting. And I'm trying to do this without spoilers, and so I'm being careful about what I say and what I give away. On to themes. So the themes in the Redwall series are never super deep, or I shouldn't say it that way. They're never super obscure themes. They're fairly commonplace, fairly classic themes that you would find in most stories, and that should be there in most of them. Of course, they have the classic good versus evil or do right theme that Kate and I have talked about, but there are also other themes like kindness and friendship, which are great themes, especially for this type of series that's geared towards this younger audience, kind of these up-and-coming people who are just starting to get out into the real world, and these messages and these themes are presented so that these young people are able to latch onto them and understand them in a very simple yet effective way. There's also themes like enjoying the freedom that you have, pressing on and sticking together even through the difficult times, helping those in need, and don't be greedy. They're, like I said, they're not terribly deep themes, but they're necessary in order to help a person make the right choices in their life. So the world/setting in this series, I've always loved this world since as long as I've been reading these books, which I don't know how long that is. This specific book, Salamandastron, covers quite a bit of land mass that is, but not nearly as much as there is in the entire world. Throughout the other books in the series, you get to see a lot of the world, and what this little part of Salamandastron grows to about this big in the other series, and it's pretty impressive what you see. Most of what you see in Salamandastron is Redwall and Salamandastron and everything in between those two. Not even everything, because there's a lot of land there. As you go through the story, you meet multiple different groups with their own societies and cultures, and you get a feel of this world that feels very lived in. The book has a lot of atmosphere. There's a lot of description of how the world feels to the characters, what they think of the world when they're interacting with it. Not a lot of description as in paragraphs and paragraphs of it, but it keeps coming up. They keep mentioning these things, or they feel a certain way. They go into Mossflower Woods and they know they're in Mossflower Woods because Mossflower has a very distinct feel to it. So there's kind of these different little ways of introducing exposition without doing info dump. And the uniqueness factor. So this fantasy world has a very minimalistic magic system. It is there. You don't really see it as a magic system because you don't really interact with the magic system. It's more of that the magic system interacts with the characters. So this magic system has a lot to do with kind of the spirits of heroes long gone coming back and offering advice and wisdom and guidance to those who need it. This is usually in the form of Martin the Warrior, or else if it's a book about the Badgers of Salamandastron, then it's the Badger Lords of old. So you'll often see Lord Brocktree or many of the other Badger Lords who come and offer advice to these characters. Definitely, I would consider it a soft magic system. The spirits can interact with the world to some degree, but it's kind of, you're not entirely sure how much they can do and what they actually do and what is done by the characters through the spirits talking to them, essentially. I don't really know how to describe this magic system because it's so soft and it's so different than really any other magic system out there in many ways that I'm not entirely sure how to describe it. Hopefully, as I continue working my way through this series this year, because I'm planning on doing that for sure, I will be able to get a better grasp on how this magic system works, or how to describe it at least. For my general thoughts, I like this book. I would kind of set it in the middle of the series between Redwall being my least favorite and probably Tagrung being my most favorite. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle there. They're all good and I enjoy them all, but it's not my favorite one of these series. The thing I really love and that I'm really doing this time reading through the entire series is I'm going into each book and specifically looking for clues that place the book in the timeline of the series. So, and I'm sure it's out there and I'm sure other people have already done this, but this is something that I've always wanted to do, is go through each and every single book, find all the connections and place each book in the correct order timeline-wise. Of course, it's pretty easy to figure out which one comes first in the timeline. That would either be Lord Brocktree, which I think does actually come first, but I'm not positive about that. It's either Lord Brocktree or Martin the Warrior. One of those two comes first, then there's Mossflower and the Legend of Luke, and then it keeps going from there. But those are really the first ones, and then I'm not sure what the last one is. It's just a hobby that I've wanted to delve into and really figure out for myself and say that I did this, I figured this out because I want to, that I've done. And I haven't completed it yet, but that's one of my goals of reading through it, and hopefully we'll see. There might be a video about that sometime. So I listened to this book on audiobook, and I love the audiobooks for the Redwall series. There's a couple of them. I think there's maybe 5 of the books that don't have an audiobook to them. And I think that has to do with Brian Jacques no longer being able to be involved in that process, probably because he was either too old or he had died. I don't know why they didn't do audiobooks for all of them, but most of them have them, and the ones that do, they're absolutely amazing. Most of the audiobooks are actually narrated by Brian Jacques himself, and then all the characters are played by a full cast of voice actors. This one was not narrated by Brian Jacques, but it was still very, I mean, it's just so good because all of the actors know this series so well, and they just are able to come and bring their all to this series and just deliver a solid performance that you go away and you're like, it's just fun to listen to this series on audiobook because they're absolutely amazing. There's a couple of them that have some issues with the recordings. There'll be some, I don't know how to describe it, but some type stuff in them. But for the most part, they're clean, amazing, super fun, super interesting audiobooks to listen to. For Brian Jacques' writing style, it's a fairly simple writing style. At the same time as it being simple though, it's very precise and intentional. He puts exactly on the page what he wants on the page to say. He doesn't just write words. He gives each word and phrase intention. The prose aren't super deep or flowery or colorful or anything like that. Like I said, it's fairly simple and easy to understand, but there's also an intentionality to it that I think obviously was purposeful. It is a YA novel, and the themes aren't necessarily the deepest, but the way that everything is presented through his writing, it should be able to be enjoyed by adults just as much as by young people, young adults, because this is technically a YA book. Although I'd say this is a great series to start your kids out. It's kind of a bridge between the middle grade and the young adult, but more on the young adult side. But it's a great series to read, and it's super easy to understand, and everything is presented so clearly and so concisely. Even when he brings in these more interesting characters, these gray characters as they would be called, meaning not somebody who's good or not, and not somebody who's bad, someone who's kind of in the middle. There are some of those characters throughout the series, and it's interesting to see because he does present those. They do exist in the real world. So he presents these themes and these stories in such a interesting and simple way, but it's so intentional and should be able to be enjoyed by all people, but unfortunately some people don't, and that has to do with personal preferences. Things like Kate doesn't like anthropomorphic fantasy. She doesn't like following animals, and as such, this series isn't really for her. That's understandable. If you don't like it, you don't like it. No one's saying that you have to, but it is very enjoyable if you do enjoy young adult and you enjoy anthropomorphic fantasy. It's so fun, and I absolutely love this series. Like I said, this book is not one of my favorites in the Redwall series. I would probably rate it at 3.75, maybe 3.5. It's good, it's worth reading. It's not my favorite though. So that's that. Thanks for watching, guys. We hope you enjoyed this video. I love this series and I love talking about this series, so anytime that I get to is just joy for me. I hope that joy comes through, and if you haven't read the series, this makes you want to. Please like and subscribe and comment down below if you haven't already, as well as follow us on Instagram. We have the link in our bio, and we try and post videos every Monday and Thursday, and for a while now we've been successful, so hopefully we can keep this up. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay warm.